I'm Evan Anderson. This is a talk about CNCF tag security, what we do, and how we help out projects, end users, and the rest of the CNCF ecosystem. So I am one of the co-chairs of the tag security. I've been participating in the CNCF for about 7 years, and I'm also a maintainer on the Knative project. I also work with the OpenSSF, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is another Linux Foundation effort specifically focused on software supply chain security.
All right, and I'm Brandt Keller. I'm a technical lead for tag security. I'm a maintainer within the OpenSSF and the CNCF. I'm a CNCF ambassador, and particularly spend my time working on the ZARF project under the OpenSSF for secure software delivery. So this kind of leads us into what are tags, a technical advisory group, primarily responsible for individual domains within the CNCF of special topics or areas. And so we could think about things like tag security and compliance. It could also be the other tags that are available, tag infrastructure, operational resilience, workloads foundation, developer experience. Each of those offering an opportunity of kind of different domain expertise. Where can you gather? Where can you kind of organize a group of people to kind of discuss and optimize and eventually work towards the evolution of these topics and domains and how they affect the landscape, how they affect the projects. For those who have been kind of monitoring the CNCF or working within the CNCF space, these might look different than you've seen in the past. Over the last year, we went through a tag reboot. We'll have some QR codes on the next slide. But really what that did was, it was kind of a fresh start. It was a chance to look at what the tags were doing, how they worked with the TOC, the Technical Oversight Committee, and kind of what were the resulting areas of improvement, what needed to change. And it offered kind of a fresh start. The tags had a lot of operational overhead that was kind of just, things that were accrued over the last 10 years. And it offered an opportunity to kind of reduce that and rescope.
I was just going to say, there's often times when you've been doing something for 10 years. We've always done it that way, and this offered a little bit of a chance to assess what are the best ways of doing things. And one of the other things I want to call out here is that the TOC defined 2 different ways for efforts within, across the CNCF that were under either the TOC or tags to operate. And you'll hear those referred to later. One is sub-projects, which are long-lived efforts to maintain or perform a process over time, and the other are initiatives. And initiatives are particularly intended to be time-bounded efforts. So rather than having something that you just start doing and you just keep doing it forever, you say, we're going to do this until this time or until we've achieved this outcome. And it gives us a chance to sort of check in on things before they become long-lived, we've always done it this way processes.
Absolutely. And so if you are interested in learning about kind of the outcomes, like what led us to this reboot, what were the outcomes, how did things change, what is the new scope of the tags, and primarily what are they responsible for, what are the sub-projects responsible for, please feel free to check that out. We really want to maintain, hey, this happened, and largely there are still a lot of the outcomes that we are, still working towards, still progressing for. So who we are, Evan and I are on stage offering kind of a, a look into the chair capacities within the tag and the tech lead capacities. And these, we kind of offer 2 sides to the coin. There are a number of individuals, great people, also listed here who are the leads for the tag. At the end of this presentation, we'll include also the contributor ladder, and that'll outline maybe a bit more clarity as to how people get involved, participate, and eventually come to be leads under the tag.
So Brandt, will you fix all my security bugs?
That's going to be a tough one.
More importantly, our job is not to directly go and fix or tell projects exactly what they need to do, but instead to provide supporting efforts. So we have a few sub-projects, which we mentioned earlier. I'm going to talk a bunch about security assessments. We also have, as an ongoing effort, a catalog, a living catalog of software supply chain compromises for people who are interested in software supply chain, starting from 1982 or 84 up to 2025. We also have several initiatives that we'll be covering in more detail. And we have an ongoing, if you visit our meetings about once a month or so, we have a discussion debate format about various security topics. And we provide a forum for projects that are interested in getting connected with experts to come in, present what they're doing, get feedback, share their learnings, and so forth. And I don't know how many of you are here as maintainers of a CNCF project. Okay, we've got at least one, at least a couple. Most CNCF projects are interested in, how do I get to that next level? I'm in sandbox, how do I get to incubating? I'm in incubating, how do I get to graduated? One thing that has changed or crystallized a little bit in the last year or so as part of the TAG reboot effort is how projects are reviewed and attempting to consistently review them to assess and do the due diligence as to whether or not they're at the next level. There are a bunch of reviews that you can participate in that can help the TOC process your application faster, get through that due diligence faster. Only one of them is mandatory. We're going to be talking about that mandatory one, which is the security self-assessments. We'll also be talking about a little bit about the security joint assessments. There are also other reviews about your project's governance and about how your project's technology and development process fits into the larger CNCF. We're not going to talk about those here, but if you're curious, there is a CNCF projects reviews channel where a lot of that work gets done, and you're welcome to join, participate, ask questions. Don't just show up and say, when's my turn? But if you have suggestions about how things could be done better, we're all ears. So security assessments. You may or may not have noticed, but there were like 9 of us on that slide as the leadership. There are 200 and some CNCF projects. It does not scale for us to go and look at every single project as a first pass. What does scale and what helps projects more is to provide them a structured set of questions, which we call a self-assessment, where they can look at their threat modeling, their supply chains, other security things, and just reflect where they're currently at, write it down, and in turn, there's the guide and some security training is here if you need it. But in turn, what you will do once you've gone through that guide, filled out the form, is you'll submit it as a PR in the TOC repo as an artifact related to your project. This is a slight change. It used to be that they lived in a separate tag security repo. The TOC is attempting to make it easier for projects to keep track of all the different reviews and governance and so forth that they've done. So inside CNCF TOC, there's a project, your project name repo, and your security assessment and your governance reviews and your due diligence and your graduation applications all go in the same folder. It's your permanent record. If you are looking to improve your security posture past your self-assessment, the next step that you can do, and if you're looking to graduate or move to incubating, it's recommended, not required, is to talk to tag security. Find someone from your project who's willing to act as a liaison and help drive the process, and file an issue in the TOC repo for a joint assessment. And there'll be a list of steps in there, and once we know who that person is we're working with, we'll help walk you through and white glove you through the rest of the process. We'll help find reviewers, ask questions, learn about your project, and at the end, you will have an addition to your self-assessment that came from independent outside reviewers, and I think a lot of projects have found that helpful. If you're interested in playing the other side of that, it's not only tag leadership who's involved in doing these security assessments, but anyone who's interested can start onboarding, can sort of shadow or help with some of the initial steps of these processes. And once you've gone through one or two, then you'll know what you're doing, and you could be the tag security lead on a joint assessment with, I think, is it Kyverno, one of the ones that we're doing right now?
In progress.
Yeah.
Yes, and kind of, to build upon that, like there is a lot of great, outcomes that come from just participating, just observing, right? The shadow process is kind of a ubiquitous, understood thing across many different ecosystems. And if you just have the ability to jump in and be like, how do people do this? What questions are they pulling from? Is it expertise that they've had in the past? Is it a bank of questions that kind of get the conversation started? These all help with, how do we bring people on board and help us join the community and be involved, and then, be next year's future leaders. And so part of the initiatives and the things that we work on are, from the perspective of like outcomes, are things that, kind of elevate the ecosystem in some way, shape, or form. We've looked at white papers in the past. Some of these have been cited in, references from NIST to elsewhere as, kind of authoritative sources from the CNCF. And that can be huge. It can be things from like the cloud native security white papers to, how do we take that guidance, take that like thought leadership around how do we do security in cloud native, and then translate that to like actionable criteria. So the security controls catalog is another great example of, let's take some broader guidance. What is it supposed to accomplish? What are the outcomes? And then break those down into individual line items, things that we can measure in some way, shape, or form. And really the idea behind, some of these white papers is people coming to the table, right? Hey, I'm new to the tag. I've never been here before. Here's my introduction. What are you all thinking about MCP security? I think there are a lot of opinions and also a lot of sources outside of the CNCF that could weigh in on that. And this is a great chance to kind of coalesce that into a like solidified initiative. Hey, let's work on providing some guidance to CNCF projects, providing some guidance to end users of CNCF products. And those things, can have a substantial impact to not only those individuals, but also, the broader ecosystem. And so we have a couple white papers in progress. As people start to bring new ideas to the table, it's a great chance to evaluate, what is the next thing that we're going to pursue that can be the, another authoritative source.
And these can provide a lot of clarity and insight because, as I'm sure 20 talks already today and 20 talks yesterday have said, that CNCF landscape can be kind of overwhelming if you're just trying to figure out what's going on. So having a focus, a lens through which to observe it can really be helpful for people figuring out what they're going to do.
Absolutely. And so white papers are, kind of one instance of initiatives. Initiative also can be some short form work statement of, hey, there's something here that we need to do better. And this could be examples such as kind of looking to the supply chain across the CNCF and saying, how do we do X, Y, or Z? How do we do SBOMs? Where do we publish them? If we wanted to actually, try to ask a question about SBOMs and derive something meaningful from them across the CNCF, can we do that? And this was an active initiative right now, Supply Chain Insights, to say, here's an idea, like, can we do this? And the answer very well may be no. The answer...
Yeah, I was just going to chime in and say, we've been beating the SBOM drum for at least 3 years, and they should be good for something. This, okay, what software is in my cluster? And if someone, found a log4j in, type in problem in one of these libraries, I should be able to figure out which CNCF software would be affected. And that should be 5 minutes, and that should be repeatable across any end user organization. Has anybody really tried doing it? Does it work? And so we've got a set of people who are trying to actually prove that it works, or if it doesn't, explain why it doesn't and what we should be doing better.
Yes, so some like research spikes, right? How does this work? Does it work at all? And if the answer is no, then what's the next best step? And so this is a great example of kind of that in progress. We said, hey, can we do this? And the answer was very much like, not really. There's actually things that need to precede that. We need to maybe standardize on a couple different lines of effort. And so I think there's some really great practical takeaways already that aren't a yes just yet.
But you'll note this isn't a software project that lives on and on. It's got a defined endpoint. Can we answer these questions, or do we have to give up?
Exactly. Another example of this is with automated governance. And so we took something like the white paper, Cloud Native Security white paper, and said, okay, well, let's break that down into a catalog of controls as we've seen them, and said, okay, well, how do you apply these against your infrastructure, maybe the way with which you use Cloud Native, maybe it's your Cloud Native projects. And so there's kind of a refresh proposed, and I don't know that we started it just yet, but to kind of reinvigorate that. Are there ways with which we can make that information more consumable? How can we automate certain aspects of that? And this effort is very much in line with that.
Well, and one more thing, the original security control catalog is a Google Docs spreadsheet, which I'm sure everyone who's worked in compliance is really familiar with those spreadsheets. But in the CNCF, we believe in software and tooling. And part of the goal of the refresh is to see if we can bring in some tooling that makes it easier to automatically manage and assess some of these things rather than simply filling our lives with spreadsheets.
And I think the last thing I would say is just like these initiatives are meant to be, kind of forward-leaning into a problem space, right? These are, maybe more specifically, if we think about supply chain security insights, thinking about projects, but these could be patterns at the end of the day, patterns that you can use, like you mentioned earlier, to apply to your enterprise, your organization, and say, okay, well, now there's kind of a pattern established. Maybe I can reuse that exact same thing. And that's when it's super valuable, in two different flavors for people to get involved and be like, yes, we're actively developing a thing. We figured out what not to do, and that was wonderful. And we pivoted, answered some new questions, and we figured out what to do. Now we can replicate this into our enterprise environments.
So this is going to be one of the things when I'm communicating, I like to think about a little bit is, what are the audiences I'm communicating to? What are they interested in? And as a tag, we have a couple different audiences. So sometimes when you're participating in these things, it helps to know who your constituents are, who your audiences are. And if you're interested in getting involved in tag security, you may have a particular audience you're hoping to speak to. Our first audience is, we're chartered by the Technical Oversight Committee. They're relying on our knowledge and expertise to help them manage and oversight the 200 and some projects that are in the CNCF. So we have a bunch of specific, things that we do, but, to some degree, the TOC is our reason for being, in a literal sense, but it's not, like most of us aren't here just because, we love the TOC and we want them to be happy. We actually care more about the projects and making sure that projects have the tools they need. The LF and the CNCF have developed a bunch of security courses that are free, and we can help maintainers find, security training that is right for them and fits them. We already talked a bunch about the security assessments. We've written a number of white papers, again, spelling out best practices and collaborating with other initiatives in, for example, operational resilience is looking at, is there a standard, could we define one or two standard CNCF supply chains that if you get on board with one of these, you'll follow a whole bunch of best practices without having to think about it and maintain it and so forth yourself. Because it's kind of cool to have 200 different supply chains, but it's also maybe diversity is not always strength. Having some standards and just, everyone uses the same, build and GitHub Actions and so forth means that we won't have a different project getting popped every week. And then, we also act as a place where a bunch of different projects who have a common interest can get together. And, I would love to see a discussion. There are 5 or 6 different authorization projects inside CNCF. Could we provide some guidance to end users as to when it makes sense to use Cedar versus, Rego and OPA versus OpenFGA? They're all great projects. They have great uses. They're probably not all the same. And the last thing is kind of why the CNCF and everyone else is here is our community and our end users. We built a whole bunch of great technology, but if they can't use it, then, we're all just kind of scribbling, crayons on the wall, and we're not really helping anybody. So that white paper output and, helping people, at the booth that we had a tag security and compliance booth, and I spent a lot of time directing people, just look at these projects. You are worried about your bank and you're like, we're moving to Kubernetes. What do we do? And I'm like, well, look at the cloud native security controls. Look at, something like Falco for EDR or a service mesh or whatever. Providing that guidance is part of the services of the tag.
Which brings us to getting involved. And I think there's a variety of different reasons to get involved. One is if you are, leading security expertise in your domain, if you have something you can bring to the table and enlighten everyone on, please get involved. I think it's always wonderful to have expertise to be able to rely on and say, hey, we're talking about IAM. Where can we find authoritative, sources for IAM expertise to not have a discussion in a silo. We want to be able to challenge each other and say, have we thought about these things? Maybe there's known patterns or gaps, anti-patterns that we want to look at and talk about. And this is why this group exists. It's to talk to each other. This is kind of the contributor ladder, if you will. If you had your sights set on progressing through various parts of this contributor ladder, like please come talk to us. But the overall parts are for self-assessments and joint assessments, like there's lots of room to get involved and participate, especially if you want to learn more about what those patterns are that we discussed, or even like you have some expertise. You are an end user who has been using a policy engine to its, to
and
its
you've got
limits.
the scars to show for it.
Exactly. And you can say, hey, I've used it in these various ways, maybe some things that I would evaluate and do differently in the future. Maybe those things are enlightening to like feedback for the project. And we can be a mechanism to getting that feedback back to the project. But really, at the end of the day, it's really just showing up is kind of the best mechanism. Come to our meetings, get involved in the discussion, and then from there, kind of see where it takes you, because it has the ability to take you to many different places very fast.
I was also going to say, in addition to participating in something like the project reviews subproject, if you have an idea or you're like, hey, cloud native would be better in a security sense if this happened, like, come, we're happy to help you craft an initiative. Someone came to the booth earlier this week and asked, what are you doing about post-quantum cryptography? And I said, that sounds like a great initiative. I wonder what it is. You want to help us, define how we can help the CNCF be ready for post-quantum? Well, let's talk about what that means.
Yeah, and I think it's just like getting involved in these discussions, even if you're just an observer, is a great way to kind of keep tabs on like what is happening, right? Like how can we stay involved just enough to understand that there is something to learn from, compromises that have happened recently, and what are we doing about them? How did our enterprise respond versus how is the ecosystem responding? And we've seen lots of great feedback loops like that, and it's just kind of like where are you, tapped into in order to understand how the security ecosystem is evolving. And as such, we have our meetings where you can come and talk with us and get involved. GitHub is a wonderful place to go and see like, hey, what's going on within the tags? We have project boards and a variety of other sources to see like what's in progress. What can you get involved with? Maybe you start putting some tag or filter onto new initiatives and you're like just waiting for the next initiative that piques your interest, or Slack. At the end of the day, you have a question, you want to understand what is the community doing about X, Y, or Z. Just drop a question. The community is very open. I think I threw a message into our Slack channel today regarding updates to GitHub and GitHub Actions. And it's just like, let's just find a common space to share some of these best practices.
And if anyone has any questions for us, now is the time. And there is either a mic back there, or if you want to speak up, we'll just repeat your question for the recording. You may want to lean a little closer to the mic.
Doesn't look like it's on.
Looks like there's another. Just want to make sure you get recorded. Because everyone in the room can hear you, but the folks who watch 3 weeks later will not.
Mic check. Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking for inspiration for a thesis paper as a cybersecurity graduate student, and very interested in supply chain security. I've worked extensively with CNCF projects as an end user, and so I'm wondering where you'd recommend to start or look for inspiration.
That's an interesting question. There's a lot of different opportunities in software supply chain. There are some specific projects that are focused on software supply chain security in the CNCF. Tough and Intoto and Notary being a few examples that come to mind. But there are also a lot of opportunities to study, the ecosystem as a whole and CNCF in particular, and do longitudinal studies around how prevalent are certain types of practices. Which are the highest risks that projects often take. To Brandt's point on his earlier post, GitHub has recently changed the default permissions that are associated with pull request target workflows. And those are definitely one of the areas where we've seen a lot of security compromises in the past. So a survey of how many repos use pull request target, what other risky things do they do, might be an interesting avenue.
I would also say, I feel like there's a pattern somewhere embedded in our initiative process that is, we don't know what the answer to this question is, and we need to go and figure out, what is the next thing that we're going to look for. And it might be projecting a little bit, but I feel like there's a chance in there to be like, okay, well, what is the common pattern? We don't know. So we go out and observe how everyone is doing this. Maybe it's CNCF projects, of which there are many. And that provides a lot of opportunity to kind of look at and say, okay, well, what is happening and is it good? Could it be improved? And maybe there's something there that kind of provides more of objective data on what you're looking for.
I mean, if you really wanted to be a little spicy, you could say, do the security practices actually improve between sandbox and graduation? Go ahead.
And my name's Cole. I am a maintainer for the Intoto project, specifically Witness and Archivista sub-projects. And my question is we have a lot of really great tooling that I think can help out some of these processes for these other projects. What is a good way that we can be connected with them? Also, with respect to the limited bandwidth that we all have between, the open source work we have, as well as, the paid work that we have to do.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the opportunities here for trying to solve some of that burden, I would say that it's probably accurate to say that the TOC is kind of a mechanism for trying to enact larger scale of changes across the ecosystem, and the tags underneath them offer the opportunity to kind of surface up what those things are. Are they concerns? Are they actions that we can go and take of hey, if we only could solve this problem, it's something that is systemic within the CNCF landscape, and maintainers alone cannot go and solve it. We need additional support, we need additional help, or we need to pull on the expertise in those domains of they already have the expertise and the tooling exists. We just need to orchestrate it in a specific way. And maybe there's an opportunity there to kind of help bridge that discussion and get it at least surfaced so that the TOC is thinking about some of these things.
I'm also going to sneak in a plug for that initiative that ended up being in operational resilience around standardizing, creating recommended supply chain, and release. I think it may be specifically around release processes for a CNCF project. It may not be the full supply chain, but it may be releases in particular. Maybe a good place, if you look at that initiative in the TOC repo, they should have communication channels and requirements and so forth. And it might be a good opportunity to go in and say, hey, you should be aware, these best practices or these tools could be helpful to CNCF projects. Can we get them into this template that's provided? Since it's an initiative, the goal is to have these templates within a bounded amount of time, which probably aligns with your, we have limited resources to just go out and help everybody.
Yeah, I'm also wondering too, maybe we have some defined patterns, right, in what good looks like. Could we leverage generative technology to kind of accelerate some of this stuff for some of the projects? But one follow-on question is that what are the major pain points that you see from the people that come and visit TAG Security, either as a member project or a corporation that has internal software development requirements that they're looking to the CNCF to help solve, or just security requirements in general?
I mean, I think one of the common patterns we've seen is there's a lack of security champions across the landscape. That's a pretty easy take. Like who is the person that has the expertise on the project and is responsible for responding to security needs? And again, to your comment on like not burning maintainers out, there often isn't always a person to go and do that. And so, when it comes to a project, is like, I just got this thing. It's called like a vulnerability, and I don't know what to do with it. Who do I talk to? And like, hopefully, we can find some ways to support those maintainers in those projects in those ways.
And I think that's actually one of the questions of security assessment is, do you have a vulnerability management process? Do you know what to do when a vulnerability shows up? And a lot of the folks who are participating in the CNCF haven't had formal security training, and they've got potentially a limited number of hours in the week and a limited number of maintainers on the project. I think projects understanding what their security posture is and consumers being able to understand the security posture of the projects is probably helpful as well. If you were in a regulated industry, that seems like it might be pretty important to you. If you are, building something that is for your build and test environment, it may not be quite as important as if, you're using it to handle payment processes. You might have, graduated risk requirements. And so being able to communicate that clearly is something that I don't think we do well these days. And I'd love for projects to be able to better speak to and communicate their security postures. Because I don't think it's reasonable for us to expect every CNCF project to all hit a very high security bar. Some of them, it's not going to be appropriate if they're in the sandbox, or if their main job, for example, is to run arbitrary code. What does a shell escape look like when your job is to run arbitrary code? Maybe you should be sandboxing around the whole thing.